I'm very interested in new and alternative methods of social organization. And when I look around and see people who are doing interesting stuff in that, I keep running into people in the Web3 and crypto community. So it's a great opportunity here to learn some stuff and to meet some new people and hopefully make some constructive connections. So I'm a vice president at a Washington, D.C. think tank. But the reason I'm here is that I run this Substack, which is now turning into a book called The Permanent Problem. The book will be out in the fall of 2025 if I can finish it on time. The Substack's out now. It's about, the Substack and the book are both about the messy and uncertain transition from mass prosperity to mass flourishing. The title, Permanent Problem, comes from a line from John Maynard Keynes, who wrote an essay back in 1930 called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. This was in the depths of the Great Depression, but he looked 100 years ahead, and in this essay said, this Great Depression thing, it's a bump in the road. Barring unimaginable cataclysms, we're going to keep getting richer and richer, and by the time your grandchildren are our age, 100 years from now or so, the world will be 4 to 8 times richer than it is today, he was about right. And he said, at that point, the humanity's perennial, long-standing problem from the outset, the economic problem, will be solved. The economic problem, he means keeping at bay material scarcity, getting food, shelter, and clothing. That by the time we're that rich, he opined that we will basically be able to take our basic material needs for granted. And so by his definition, the economic problem would be solved. He said at that point, mankind's permanent problem comes into view, which is, as he puts it, how to live wisely and agreeably and well with all the blessings that science and compound interest have bestowed upon us. And he got some things terribly wrong. He thought that by now we'd only be working 15 or 20 hours a week. But he got one big thing right. He said, this is not going to be an easy transition. He said, this is uprooting the habits of generations from time immemorial. It's going to be something like a general social nervous breakdown. I started wondering what in the world was going wrong with our politics and American politics, and therefore with problems in American society that were manifesting in politics. Sometime around 2015, 2016 is when I went from being a basically optimistic person about the future course of my country to thinking that we were on the wrong course. And I came to see the political problems as manifestations of deeper social conflicts and tensions, which could be understood as floundering in this no man's land between material prosperity and mass prosperity and mass flourishing. That we're rich enough now that we've raised our sights, and what we want out of life is fulfillment and self-realization. But we aren't there yet, at least most of us aren't there yet. And in fact, the institutions and culture that got us rich are creating a whole lot of obstacles to get from here to there. That's how I came to be thinking about what is flourishing. I'm just a recovering lawyer and DC policy wonk. This is the question, the meaning of life. But I can't claim to be original at all. All I can do is tell you how, in thinking through the problems of our society and trying to get down to the bottom level, thinking about the problems of individual lives, how I've tried to make sense of this and how this shapes my understanding of where we are and where we need to go. So first, flourishing comes from the same word as flower, right? So it means to blossom, to grow, to realize your potential. This all, in philosophy, it goes all the way back to Aristotle and his concept of eudaimonia. Let me get out a little, I'll cheat here and read a quote. John Rawls, in The Theory of Justice, summarized Aristotle's views on flourishing as the Aristotelian principle. And he said, Other things equal, human beings enjoy the exercise of their realized capacities, that is, their innate or trained abilities. And this enjoyment increases the more the capacity is realized or the greater its complexity. So that's really abstract, but it gets to the idea that flourishing is about being all you can be, realizing your potential. I think to get to a sensible place in understanding this, you're going to have to stay away from two imposters, dogma on the one side and or radical relativism on the other. On the one hand, there are a zillion different ways to flourish. There's enormous amounts of variety and all kinds of different good lives. On the other hand, there is such thing as human nature. There are some things that just aren't going to work out for people. There are some bounds and constraints on what a human life is going to be like that's going to determine whether it's a good one or a bad one. And we can't decide to change our nature and make things that are awful for us good for us. So basically what we find are crazy, endless variations on a few basic themes. To me, I've identified three broad avenues of flourishing. I got this from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a wonderful book from a Holocaust survivor, figuring out how to flourish under the worst possible circumstances. So, three avenues for flourishing: relationships, projects, and experiences. For most people, this is the most important thing. There's this fantastic Harvard longitudinal study launched in the 30s that follows these young men, some from Harvard, some from disadvantaged backgrounds, follows them, their sons, their grandsons, and onward in generations for 75 years now. And their big takeaway is the most important thing for a well-lived life is strong relationships, period, the end. We're hypersocial animals. You deprive babies of human contact. Many times they'll fail to thrive. They won't grow. They'll even die. Put adults in solitary confinement for long enough, they'll go insane. We deeply need other people. Projects. That's anything. Can be anything that is useful to you or to others that takes some skill, some difficulty to pull off. Of course, there are terrible, toxic relationships and evil projects and awful experiences, but we'll just assume our normal moral intuitions can make that division. But there's all kinds of wonderful pro-social projects, or ones that are just personally fulfilling and don't really affect anybody else. And then, of course, experiences. All of us, are lottery winners in the biggest lottery of all, the birth lottery, over against astounding odds. We came to be, and our winning ticket entitles us to open our senses and take in the world around us. And you don't have to do anything to see a beautiful sunset or hear children's laughter, and it makes you happy. So our capacity to experience, and this is something Viktor Frankl talks about, even in the horrors of concentration camps, people could weep at a beautiful sunset. Those are the three broad avenues of individual flourishing. I don't think we can be very prescriptive other than to say that a good life has some mix of those three things. The nature of the mix is going to depend on individual characteristics. There are some people, a lot of people like in this room, who are so into their projects and think they're so important that can be consuming. And maybe some people like that can be give so much of their lives to their projects and have a little left, not so much left over for relationships and experiences outside their projects, and we can still say they had a wonderful life. There are people whose projects don't amount to anything, but who are so enmeshed in deep and deeply meaningful experiences, we know they're having a good life. And there are people who can cultivate, capacity for kind of gourmet experiences of all different kinds, who we can envy the way they live their life. So when we then switch, though, from individual flourishing to collective flourishing, I think we can get a little bit more prescriptive when we're talking about what is a flourishing society. And that's because there are some things that have to be present to some degree in a society, that don't have to be present in the individual life. So most basically and most obviously, and not hypothetically, you can live a wonderful, fulfilling life without ever having children. But if a society gives up on parenting, that society cannot flourish because it cannot reproduce itself, and it's a dead end. Likewise, not everybody has to be deeply intellectual. Not everybody has to be artistically creative. Not everybody has to be a risk-taking entrepreneur. But you need to have some levels of those kinds of dynamic creative activities in your society, or your society is stagnant. We can, I think, make judgments about societies to a greater extent than we can about individual lives. But our way of thinking about well-being generally makes it difficult for us to do that. Our dominant language now for thinking about well-being is to think about preference satisfaction, getting what you want, and maximizing choice. Those in economics and consumerism, those are the desiderata. Fulfilling people's preferences, whatever they may be, and maximizing their choices. But if you have everybody following that, and it leads to a society where no one's having children, then you have this conflict between individual flourishing and collective flourishing. So there can be tensions between them, and there certainly are tensions between them. I would say that our mass society of capitalism is great at creating opportunities for some people, for well-educated, highly skilled people, to engage in large-scale projects of great significance. Our way of life today is a lot tougher on relationships. It pulls us apart geographically, and it distracts the hell out of us, so that we spend a lot more time than we should sitting alone, looking at a screen, and not as much time connecting with other people. When you look at collective flourishing, I think you can break it down into three different dimensions. The first is just average flourishing, so take everybody and divide by the number of people. So that's then there's peak flourishing. How well are the best among us doing? Who is advancing? You can see this as who's advancing humanity's list of great achievements. These are sort of the peak accomplishments of human beings. And then total flourishing, which is sort of average times the number of people, right? So we can think about how these conflict or have tensions with each other today, and I think all three are really important. A lot of people, there's sort of Nietzschean types who just think about this and have contempt for this and this. There are effective altruist types who just think about this and ignore this. And I think to the extent that you try to harmonize everything into one kind of mono form of collective flourishing, you're gonna miss the boat, and you're gonna end up misconceiving what you're trying to think about. The most obvious tension amongst these goes well back in the past, in the transition from hunter-gatherer life to farming. It seems to be the weight of current evidence is that this was net bad news for human nutrition and well-being, that people got shorter and lived shorter lives, that crowded together with each other and crowded together with animals. They just infected each other a lot. Epidemic disease became a much bigger deal. It wasn't a thing when people were all spread out. And of course, they were locked into 95% of people were subsistence farmers with very little surplus, and a good chunk of that surplus was taken by a predatory elite, 3 to 5% of the population. And those 3 to 5% of the population were then responsible for everything that we call civilization. 95% of humanity is completely invisible to us in the historical record. Everything we think of as the glories of the past is from a small minority of people. So the agrarian age did wonders for peak flourishing. We created all these, beautiful temples you see here in Chiang Mai, and all the wonders and achievements of civilization. And yet, for most people, life was terrible and probably worse than it was for the average hunter-gatherer. Then, however, total flourishing exploded because the dawn of the agrarian age had maybe 5 million people. By the time industrialization started, we had about 1 billion. So a huge increase in the number of people having experiences at all. So it is my faith that over the long run, these reconcile. That is, that making conditions good for peak flourishing will help average and total flourishing in the long run, that allowing the talented and creative to explore and build will, over the long run, bring everybody up. But there are clearly tensions on various margins, and we need to acknowledge them. So what can we say then about what a flourishing society looks like? Here I'm going to rely on, again, like I said, no originality. I rely on Aristotle, and now I'm going to rely on Immanuel Kant, who had this wonderful description of humanity's dual nature as social unsociability. That on the one hand, we're hypersocial, we need each other, we absolutely have to be around each other, we're deeply interdependent. On the other hand, we're competitive, we're curious, we want to leave the gang we're with now to look and see what's over the other hill. And so we have, as he says it, these warring impulses that bring us into society and then make us, want to withdraw from it or dominate the other people in it if we don't get our way. And so we have these two elements in human nature, and I think they both must be given expression in a society for that society to flourish. And so I would say that the sort of core components of a flourishing society are dynamism and inclusion. So dynamism, to create conditions favorable for exploration, experimentation, trial and error, discovery, change, and also inclusion, that is creating an environment in which people connect with each other and find belonging, status, and meaning. So those are, in my book, those are the two dimensions that I focus on in looking at what's going wrong. I think in the 21st century, we can see capitalism having big problems with both dynamism and inclusion. As to dynamism, the growth rate in the United States is over a third in the 21st century so far, is about a third down from what it averaged over the 20th century. And the United States is doing great compared to all the other rich democracies. Many rich democracies have experienced prolonged periods of stagnation. There has been little productivity growth outside of information technology anywhere. Not much in the United States, virtually none in Europe. Since Europe doesn't have that much IT productivity growth, there are more countries with zero or negative productivity growth over the past 15 years in Europe than there are countries with positive growth. So dynamism is, in terms of just economic performance and particularly innovation, which we measure by productivity growth, and productivity growth is how much output can you get from a given quantity of inputs. So how to use capital and labor to produce more stuff. The engines of productivity growth are sputtering all over the rich, advanced world. Inclusion problems, we've got them at the macro level and we've got them at the micro level. At the macro level, we've had the reopening of a class divide, especially in the United States. It's starker there than in Europe, but it's everywhere. And this class divide is along educational lines. The information economy, the sort of bloodless economic term for this is skill-biased technical change, that the nature of technological change in the recent decades has been to reduce relative demand for unskilled labor and to increase relative demand for highly skilled labor. And so you've seen more rewards flowing to the highly skilled and much less income growth, and I think just plunging social status for people who used to be in the working class, but it doesn't really make sense to call that anymore. But the people who would have occupied the industrial working class and who are now in retail and home health care and cleaning and other low-paying, low-status, no career track kinds of jobs. So that's at the macro level. At the micro level, things are more alarming than that, although these two interrelate, and that is we have just a sort of epidemic of disconnection going on in our society. An epidemic which is much, much more advanced amongst the non-college educated than it is amongst the highly educated. So we have people marrying later, marrying less, people not having children anymore, people reporting fewer close friends than people reported in the past, higher percentages of people reporting having no close friends at all. Big spikes in emotional and mental distress, especially amongst adolescents these days. And we talk about deaths of despair, sort of rising deaths from drugs, alcohol, or suicide. Those are concentrated amongst the less well-educated, and they have been spiking. Although, stepping back, there's a very interesting paper that I just recently became aware of, that we tend to follow the good news or bad news about drugs, kind of drug by drug. So I remember back in the late 80s, angel dust came out, and it was just horrible, and everybody was freaking out about it. And then crack came, and everybody was, it was awful, and people were freaking out about it. And those subsided, and so we have sort of good news and bad news. But if you step back and just look at the whole cycle, from the late 60s to now, we're on this steady exponential increase in overdose deaths. So there's a steady trend line of a ever higher percentage of people who just can't take it anymore and want to check out. So that's about as clear an indictment of things going wrong in terms of social connectedness as you could imagine finding. So we've got big problems. And I think we also have gigantic opportunities. How to put this? Kind of step back and look at the most big picture level at how our way of life is interfering with especially building and maintaining relationships, but also with condemning healthy majorities of people to projects of employment that are not conducive to flourishing. And I think you can, well, here's a good way to look at it. There's a wonderful essay in The Economist a few months back by a political scientist Henry Farrell and a statistician Cosima Shalizi. And they, of course, everyone these days with the new advances in AI has resumed to talk about the singularity and the possibility of some transformative change that's so dramatic and radical that it's no point of even speculating what's on the other side of it. That's what Kurzweil meant when he talked about the singularity 20 years ago. And now we're thinking, a lot of people at the forefront of AI are thinking we're just years away from superhuman machine intelligence and perhaps a singularity. Farrell and Shalizi argue maybe, but what we should all realize is we're already a couple hundred years into a singularity, and that's industrializing modernity, which has put us in a way of life that is totally and completely and radically different from the way human beings lived all before. And in particular, our lives have been transformed by a pair of what can be thought of without too much damage as artificial intelligences, the market and bureaucracy, both impersonal information processing systems that happen to do their computations through the actions of human beings. And those systems created this vast impersonal order which mobilizes and coordinates the cooperation of hundreds of millions of people in this incredibly fine-grained division of labor. And that's an amazing thing. But that economic wealth creation happens in a legal and regulatory context that is made possible by the social technology of bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the marketplace is the space between all the economic actors. The economic actors themselves tend to be large organizations, and those are bureaucratically organized and run. So the technologies of market and bureaucracy are absolutely fundamental to our way of life. And yet their logic, like we worry about alignment between AI and us, the alignment between markets and bureaucracy and our personal well-being is, right? So there's tension between it. We all talk about work-life balance. We know that there are things shoving our lives out of balance, and we have to push back if we want to maintain a healthy equilibrium. But I think I don't really anthropomorphize, but one can think of the market and bureaucracy as acting as if they were pursuing a purpose. There is at any rate, they both have pronounced tendencies to expand relentlessly. And so over the course of my lifetime, I have seen consumerism and commercialism expand. So first, to include mass participation of women in the workforce. Second, we had one day of the week when I was a little boy cut off from commerce, Sunday. That was gone by the 80s or 90s, so we had commerce invading, colonizing the last day of the week. We had the professions, law and medicine, saw themselves as learned professions, different from not commercially motivated. They had professional canons of ethics. A lot of that was self-serving cant that covered very aggressive money grubbing. But still, I think at the kind of local individual proprietor practice level, there was a professional ideal in law and medicine that was different from normal profit-seeking businesses. Law and medicine have been completely commercialized in my lifetime, and they're now dominated by profit-seeking Ubralis. Universities, another medieval institution that seemed to stand apart from offering the life of the mind as opposed to the life of action, offering to, the product they sold you was to have a well-lived life. Now, the product they sell you is to get a good job, right? So universities have been commercialized and are now see their mission as supporting capitalism, getting people into good jobs, right? And then, of course, the church has declined in presence over the course of my lifetime. The church attendance, in two waves, one in the 70s and then over the past 10 or 15 years, has nosedived. And the number of people who say they don't belong to any particular faith tradition is up, 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 up. That doesn't mean people are becoming more rational and scientifically oriented. They still believe in ghosts and angels and consult their horoscopes and all the rest. As Chesterton said, the problem with not believing in God isn't that you believe in nothing, it's that you'll believe in anything. So I wouldn't interpret the collapse of organized religion as a sort of rationalist triumph. It's more just sort of the privatization of supernaturalism or of religiosity, of the quest for the transcendent, and that privatization eliminates a whole lot of the well-being value of religion, which is getting people together in communities. And so we have seen the logic of commerce win out over one holdout area of society after another over the course of my lifetime. Everybody, don't have to convince anybody that bureaucracy is imperialistic. If you've worked at a big corporation and you had any dealings with HR, you know about it. Of course, we know all the florid dysfunctions of government, and it doesn't surprise any of us that bureaucracy can grow excessively, and so both want to go as far as they can. The problem is that both are driven by ideologies, the market by consumerism, the bureaucracy by managerialism. And both of those ideologies are ideologies of outsourcing. Consumerism says anything that you need, you can buy it. And so all you need to do to pursue happiness is make the right purchasing decisions. So leave it to us. We can save time so that you can focus on what really matters. That's the thing again and again. Question whether people are actually focusing on what really matters after saving that time. Often not. Meanwhile, managerialism's implicit theory is that lay people don't know how to do anything, and they must have experts telling them what to do and overseeing what they do, or we'll end up in chaos. And so both of these systems overshoot by overassuming responsibilities from us. And this is important because flourishing is effortful. You can't outsource flourishing. You can't get somebody else to do it for you. You can't rely on the experts to give you a well-lived life. You have to do it by yourself. And so that means you have to push back against pressures that are inconsistent with what a well-lived life looks like. And right now, I think that both bureaucracy and market pressures are pushing us in ways that are uncongenial to well-lived lives. I would like to leave plenty of time for talking and to filling in the blanks. I'll just say a little bit about where I see, how I see that things might improve. In my book, I'm arguing that the way to rise to the challenge of the permanent problem, the way to make a society both more dynamic and inclusive, involves first refocusing and revitalizing capitalism to do its job, which is to advance the technological frontier. Our current technological dispensation is not environmentally sustainable over the long run. It is not sociologically sustainable over the long run. So we need to get richer. Likewise, we have a world now where people have their basic material needs fulfilled. That's great, but it's not easy, right? Everybody has to work really hard and constantly, often at tasks that are totally alienating to them, just to pay the bills. So if we were much, much richer, we could have which doesn't necessarily mean higher incomes, but could mean absurdly low costs, then then we could have a world where more and more people enter the labor market on a truly discretionary basis. That is, they're independently wealthy, they could have a fine life without working right now. And so a world where we're much richer is a world where I think we will have the resources to step back, because not step backward into a simpler, poorer life, which is the usual back to the land, we got to reconnect message, but step back from mobilization into commercial and bureaucratic think into face-to-face personal relationships. And when in that liberated environment, so then, first of all, we need to address two big conflicts that arose during industrialization. First, the conflict between our technological capability and the health of the rest of the biosphere. And I think we can address that. We can change our relationship from adversarial with the biosphere to custodial of the biosphere. And in doing that, we can eliminate a huge source of anti-technology sentiment, which is born of the correct realization that technology can cause a lot of harm. So the answer is not to surrender technology, the answer is to get to better technology. The second great challenge is to reconcile the institutions that have made us rich with our nature as social animals. How can we reconnect personally and have vital personal face-to-face relationships that are what human beings need to thrive? And there, I think part of the answer is just getting richer. That's been the answer thus far. The richer we get, we tend to put some of it into buying more stuff and some of it into buying more leisure. That was super obvious up through the 40s, where the work week kept getting shorter. Work week stabilized, but then people delayed entry into the workforce for college and grad school, and then people started doing early retirement and living longer, so having longer lives post-work. So the average working hours over a lifetime have been on steady decline all through. So we can expect to see that trend continue if we just keep getting richer, which is hard right now because productivity growth is measly. So an important reason to revitalize capitalism. But then, like I said, the system can't flourish for us, we have to do it ourselves. So we have to design ways of living that are more congenial to our needs than the ones we're in right now. And I think the most obvious direction we need to go is towards smaller, face-to-face communities that have practical functions with each other. So why are our relationships deteriorating and our connections to people, the quality of them deteriorating? It's because those relationships don't serve urgent practical functions in the way that they used to. So once upon a time, you had kids because it was an act of God, but also they helped out on the farm, and when you're old, they'll take care of you. You had a spouse who was your helpmate on the farm. You worked together. You had neighbors who you depended upon in times of need or times of danger. You're out there on the frontier. If you don't stick together, you're all going to get picked off. And conversation with others was the only alleviation for mind-crushing rural boredom, right? So you needed people, obviously, then for entertainment. But in all of these areas, we have figured out ways to get the market or the state to do these functions for us, so that our personal relationships now are just purely personal consumption choices, right? They're just one consumption choice in a huge universe of competing consumption choices. And so you got friends, they're important, I haven't seen them in a long time, but then, here's this streaming series that's on, it's binging, and your friend lives halfway across town, and it's just so much easier to seek to fulfill your desire for entertainment through solitary pleasures than through reconnection. We need to institutionalize work-life balance. Right now, we think of it as a purely individualistic thing. It's on you to figure it out. But all the structures of life are pushing you towards an imbalanced life, but you do your best to push the other way. Whereas if we had a world where we had more co-living arrangements so that people could live with people they liked or people they related to or live near them, and they could share child care responsibilities and they could share elder care responsibilities instead of warehousing their kids and their parents. So you can, just from that's already happening, you're already starting to see that germinating. You can build communities that do stuff with each other and therefore are vitally organically connected with each other and therefore have strong, durable relationships. If you look into the farther future and look at possible technological developments like solar, but also like small modular nuclear, vertical farming, 3D printing, all of those would be like great for a moon colony or a Mars colony, for a completely self-sufficient place out in the middle of nowhere. They need those kinds of things to live well. Likewise, though, if we use them on Earth, they would allow communities to be much more self-sufficient than they are today, and to actually have some degree of local self-provision rather than complete dependence on the market. I don't want to end the capitalism. It has incredibly vital tasks to do, but on the non-vital tasks, I think we ought to be figuring out how to do, are the tasks that aren't best suited for impersonal coordination through markets, but are best suited for flesh and blood cooperation, that we ought to reassume those responsibilities and take them back from the artificial intelligences we outsource them to. Okay, I'll leave it there, and I hope to get a few questions.
Thank you so much, Brink. I'm going to come around with a mic in case folks have questions. Yes, just up here.
Thank you, Brink. That was really interesting and clearly outlined. Yeah, hydration is important for flourishing, right? Like a flower. So we focused a lot on human flourishing, and you mentioned the climate crisis. I'm curious if you've developed any dimensions or avenues for non-human flourishing, like the environment or animals?
Yes. So when I said that our current technological dispensation is not ecologically sustainable, I was referring both to our reliance on fossil fuels and our reliance on factory farming. So climate change, we understand the problem with fossil fuels, and it's not just climate change, they poison the air, and the more we learn about air pollution, the more we learn just how terrible it is, and the degree to which we've just been poisoning ourselves and making ourselves stupid through the stuff we breathe is underappreciated, and the benefits of clean energy transition just in reduced air pollution are like more than enough to pass cost-benefit analysis. You don't even have to think about climate. So anyway, that's one big part of it. But factory farming is another big part, and it's clearly awful for animal welfare. I think we can have a range of views about how much weight to put on the lives and quality of life of non-human creatures. But I don't think we can put zero weight, and I don't think our current system can be justified under any other criteria than zero weight. So every year we kill hundreds of billions of animals and trillions of fish and sea creatures, and along the way torture them in unspeakable ways. But again, the sort of 1.0 response to recognizing this is we got to go back. We have to go back. We have to abandon progress. Progress is awful. We need to go back to organic family farms and blah, blah, blah. And that just won't work because it won't feed enough people. So no, we have to keep going forward. We're a rock climber halfway up. So this is no place to stop. And going back down is no good. So I think growing plants outside is super, super economical for sunlight, for energy supply. It's incredibly profligate of every other input that goes into to raising food. So half of our habitable land area in the world is consumed by agriculture, and like 70% of that is livestock. And all that puts enormous pressure on habitats. All of that then also puts humans in very close, sustained contact with animals, and so our current factory farming system is just a petri dish for pandemics, as we are discovering in the 21st century. We had a few little sort of damp squibs early on, and then a big one, but that's not the last one. And I imagine other ones could be considerably, more lethal. So even if you don't care too much about animal welfare, I think there are reasons for moving past dependence on our current way of doing things, and in particular the possibility of artificial meat, whether plant-based or cultured, I think opens up the possibility of escape from really horrible things we do to feed ourselves. So.
Great. There was someone
At the bar? Yeah.
This side at the bar. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I think you talked a lot about capitalism, like advanced technology, right? Talking about flourishing and work-life balance. I kind of curious. Do you think this is like an unlimited game? Basically means the human can continue grow monotonically, increasing direction, right? We are just going to optimize this, or there's like a stopping point. I will give one example. The major concerns I have is for AI.
Yep.
Right. So basically, instead of all the technology you mentioned, like a bureaucracy, managerialism, right, or blockchain, maybe they're all assuming that human will be a node or needed in this mechanism, in this machine, right? But but I think AI is specifically designed to just automate human, or in a way replace part of the human, right? So what is the, will this change some of the thing? The technological direction, is this like a unlimited game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can say nothing except my own personal way I think about these things. But for me, I have a very open-ended view of human possibility. So for one thing, I think it's really hard for society to stay dynamic without steadily increasing population. We're gonna have a big test about that over the next 50 years or so. But I also think this matters. Total matters. So the more, the merrier. And if we stop and don't grow anymore, I feel we will encounter sort of overwhelming temptations to turn inward and to turn into the virtual and to turn away from the real. And which, that's great to explore, but to give up all of flesh and blood reality for virtual reality, I think is a lousy trait. I would like to do both. I would like to go as far as we can in exploring virtual world. I'm happy and open to seeing transhuman and post-human possibilities. I'm excited by the possibility of intelligences that are, that are not carbon-based, that are silicon-based. But I'm a human being, and I'm a bigoted human being. I'm for humans, right? So the sort of Nick Land accelerationism of that nothing human survives the near future, I find that horrifying. I would I would like to live in a world where we have AI doing wonderful things as tools for us, and perhaps as, to some extent as caretakers for us, but I want the human story to keep going. And for it to keep going in as interesting a way as possible, I think it has to leave its home planet and expand. So my vision of human flourishing is human beings spreading our unsocial sociability all over the galaxy, so, yeah.
Can you hear me? First of all, I just want to say that was a fascinating talk, and I appreciate you sharing. I had a question on your perspective on the value of like a collective vision of the future, because I thought it was interesting what you were saying earlier around sort of the downfall of religion and how, at least from my perspective, one of the things that the biblical narrative provided was like an end vision to aim towards. So in the Bible, the end vision is this new Jerusalem, or like heaven on earth. Whereas now, in a more secular society, we don't have an end vision that we're all collectively trying to build.
Right.
So we have all the, how do you build better technology without values that we all agree upon? I mean, I know that's a very challenging question, but.
Yeah. I had a thought and now it's escaped me. Dang. So I agree that groups need to be bound together by some sense of shared ultimate purpose, and I think I have never been a religious. I've always said I've been someone who has always been without religious beliefs, but with religious sentiments. That is, I can't get around to believing the various supernatural stories on offer. But I do see religion as a clearly deep, universal human need that's responding to something important, and that that even if one doesn't believe the literal, factual nature of the sacred stories, those sacred stories are myths, and those myths may not be accurate empirical reporting about what's in the past, but they can be perennially symbolic truths about the human condition. And I think there are things you can say through myths, and through ritual that you can't say through white papers or any other way. So I can't imagine flourishing human societies without something that looks like religious practice, but it's going to be a pluralism of religious practices. But on this idea of shared vision of the future, what first popped in my head was Peter Thiel's idea of definite versus indefinite visions of the future, which I find very insightful. And so if you have a clear, concrete vision of the technological future, then you work towards it, right? If you think the future is probably going to be better, but you have no idea how, then you just focus on optionality, right? You just get your resume as diverse as possible, so you're ready for anything. But that's not the way creators are monomaniacs who go out and devote their lives doing something, not keeping all their options open all the time. So in Thiel's view, America turned from definite optimism to indefinite pessimism or optimism, depending on the decade between the 60s and the 70s. And I think that's fair. I think, when I was a kid, I was born in 1962, so I grew up, with the Apollo program in the background, and I was a maniacal fan of it. And, my dad subscribed to Popular Science, and every month it would be a picture of underwater cities or flying, or flying cars. It was all of that stuff was just, that was our future. And then we didn't get it. And people really stopped thinking about it. And I think a lot of that had to do with the environmental movement and the kind of anti-technology backlash that it came in with. A lot of it had to do with just, I think, getting rich and getting complacent and getting loss averse. I talk about that a lot in my essays and in the book. But we did lose a sense of a clear vision of which America had always had visions of this, concrete visions of this is what we're going to do this, and life is going to look different in this way, and so let's all go do that. That really pretty much stopped people, and we had the switch from to dystopian science fiction. That became pretty much totally dominant in recent decades. We just lost our confidence in the future because we lost the ability to think about it in concrete ways. So I think imagining a new technological dispensation and imagining new social arrangements that go along with it, a lot of it's going to be extravagantly, absurdly wrong, right? So all plans, are imperfect, but planning is essential. But to have that vision, to motivate things, I think really is important.
Yeah, maybe a couple more. We'll do one here and one on the other side.
Thank you so much. A question: how do you measure flourishing? Basically, how do we know that we're there?
I think you can. It's not a unitary substance. You can't pour it into a beaker and measure how many cc's of flourishing there are. So the best you can do is a dashboard, I think, of different qualities of course, you can do satisfaction surveys and things like that. Those are very limited. We're all super adaptable. So pretty much everybody's going to say they're pretty satisfied with their life because they don't want to sound like a whinging complainer. And we all make the best of things anyway. That just doesn't tell you whether you're in a good system or there's a better system that's possible. Meanwhile, all the happiness measures just go from 1 to 10, and so you can't just. There is no 11. The relationship between income and happiness has to peter out just by math, right? Income can go on forever, and happiness just goes to 10. So I think those measures are really bad. But suicide rates and people having as many babies as they say they want, the percentage of people who are there's a lot of measures of things going wrong right now, and so I think. If we look at those measures and we see those indicators turn around and go in the right direction, then we know we're making progress. But that's about as good as I can come up with.
Hello. Do you have any examples, or are you aware of any examples of communities reassuming responsibilities from markets and bureaucracies?
Sure. So, there's been this impulse to get back to the land, to get back to the real, has been with us since factories first started appearing on the landscape, and some people reacted poorly to the aesthetics of them. So we saw a huge wave of that in the 60s. That was kind of an affluence-based. We're rich now we should focus on what's important. We should get back to the land and focus on love. They weren't nearly rich enough to do it, and they weren't good enough farmers to do it, so it didn't work. But the idea of intentional communities is one they're still around. The problem with this impulse all along is it has been a reactionary impulse all along. That that impulse is married to an ideology that says we're on the wrong path. And it doesn't say we're on the right path, but we need to keep going. Right? We haven't gone far enough yet. It says we've gone the wrong way, and we need to go back. So I think when we can find intentional communities that are high tech and focused on dynamism and inclusion as necessary partners, then I think that movement can I think it's going to take off. At these events and similar events, there's all kinds of groups now that are entrepreneurs that are trying to make money off of improving well-being for people, creating co-living spaces and creating spaces for multi-generational living. So there's a lot of sort of ferment out there. I hope as I write this book that it will be it will give me an opportunity to then start meeting the people who are actually building the future that I am hoping for.
I think we just had one last question from Sam.
Brink, is there a point in history we had flourishing more than today? Isn't it the curve is like just like?
So that's a great question, and I was gonna address that and I forgot to. So after saying what flourishing, what it amounts to, I said we're having problems, but I didn't really go into like how are we doing, how do we grade ourselves. So it depends on how you do it, right? So if we grade on a historical curve, I think we got to say we're doing great, right? We're the richest, healthiest, longest lived, best educated people who have ever lived. And a good 25 to 30% of the people are doing jobs that have really high intrinsic satisfaction. And no society ever before has remotely equaled that level of accomplishment. So on a historical curve, we should be immensely proud of ourselves. But there's other questions we can ask. We can ask, is the rate of improvement constant, accelerating, or slowing down in key areas? And we can see key areas like economic growth and the scaling of innovation where the rate of progress has slowed down. Are there areas relevant to well-being where things are going in the wrong direction? For sure, I've talked about a whole bunch of those. But then I think maybe the biggest question is progress in the art of living commensurate with the progress we have made in amassing our wealth and powers? And I think that really gets at no, right? If anybody 100, 200 years ago had been told about the stuff we can do, they would just think we live in utopia. Absolutely, right? Because they would have assumed that the arts of living would have evolved in proportion with all these other amazing capabilities that we've developed, but they haven't. In fact, in some ways, they've regressed. So I think we shouldn't damn our status quo, damn capitalism for making us all miserable. It's made the most successful societies of all time, but we can do a lot better.